coming up. So one down, one to go, and then a general election by my reckoning. After sticking by her chancellor right up until yesterday, Prime Minister Liz Truss has performed her most audacious U-turn to date by firing her chancellor, ideological soulmate and fellow Tufton Street puppet, Kwasi Kwarteng. Brexit eats another one of its children. In this video, I'm taking a look at some of Liz Truss's other most significant U-turns so far, plus some other U-turns that I expect to come over the next few days and weeks. Not the pre-prime ministerial U-turns like when Hi Viz Liz changed from Lib Dem to Tory, or from Remainer to Brexitist, or anti-monarchist to royalist. No, I'll be looking at just those U-turns she's performed during her short tenure as Prime Minister, including her change of heart on the 45p higher tax rate, fracking, windfall taxes, and whether President Macron of France is a friend or a foe. Prime Minister Liz Truss has already given us more flip-flops than a beach clothing store, and there's still plenty more to come from what you might call this most unprincipled of politicians. Or, to put it more eloquently, quoting ex-Tory MP Matthew Parris from his Times article back in August, Liz Truss is a planet-sized mass of overconfidence and ambition, teetering upon a pinhead of a political brain. If you enjoy watching my videos, please give this one a like and spread the word by sharing a link on your favoured social media platforms. If you subscribe, you can also hit the bell icon to be notified of each new video I release. Whether it's riding in a tank, wearing a fur hat in Moscow, or wearing weird 1970s style tops, Liz Truss has often tried to draw comparisons with her Tory idol, Margaret Thatcher. But rather than the Iron Lady, Truss is referred to as the Iron Weathervane by leaders in the EU, including Macron, because she changes direction with the prevailing wind. Though, to be fair, some of the changes in direction were U-turns on Tory pledges that predated her catastrophic elevation to the office of Prime Minister. So let's take a look at some of the manifesto commitments that she wants to renege on, with the justification, to quote her spokesman, that the manifesto commitments were made before there was a war in Europe and a pandemic. How about that as a get-out-of-jail-free card? But the problem that leaves is, to quote the Greenpeace activists at the Tory conference, who voted for this? This series of U-turns, that is. First up, fracking. The 2019 Tory manifesto pledged not to lift England's ban on fracking unless it was scientifically shown to be safe. But Truss has lifted the fracking ban, despite the evidence still being inconclusive. Greenpeace said it was clear that in the 3 years since that pledge in the manifesto, there have been no significant breakthroughs in the science of prediction and management of earthquakes caused by fracking. But Truss's business secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg, said the move would help to strengthen the UK's energy security in light of Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine and weaponisation of energy. And if you're thinking, oh well, perhaps the haunted pencil really does have a point, then listen to Chris Cornelius, the founder of fracking company Quadrilla, who says that the Truss government's support for fracking in the UK is just a political gesture because the geology of the UK is unsuited to widespread fracking operations. No sensible investors would take the risk of embarking on large projects here. So Truss U-turned on the non-fracking pledge, with a dangerous fantasy that it would somehow cut energy bills, dying in a head-on collision with reality. Next, fast food. Whitehorse sources say that Liz Truss is planning to abandon all the government's existing strategies to address the obesity crisis, including bans on buy one get one free type multi-buy offers, displays of sweet treats at supermarket checkouts, and adverts for junk food being shown on TV before the 9 p.m. watershed. Truss seems to be taking instruction from her puppeteers from the shady so-called think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs, particularly Christopher Snowdon, who says, "We are long overdue a Prime Minister who puts the interests of consumers over the interests of nanny state pressure groups." But this mouthpiece for the ultra-neoliberal free market extremists at the IEA really means, how dare the government prioritise public health over corporate profits? Obesity contributes to at least 64,000 deaths a year in England alone and costs £58 billion of public money. William Roberts, the chief executive of the Royal Society for Public Health, says, "Far from being a nanny state, this is about the government making a sensible economic investment in the health and wealth of our nation and the NHS for decades to come." See, anything that can be described by an expert as sensible is bound to attract the ire of Truss. As a Brexitist, she's of course had enough of experts and would rather listen to her free market ideologue controllers at the IEA. Next, the £10,000 tax cut for the UK's 660,000 highest earners. Liz Truss dropped plans to axe the 45p top rate of income tax a day after saying she was absolutely committed to it on national TV. This particular U-turn happened in the middle of the Tory conference after a furious revolt from her own MPs, and just as importantly, after a panicked reaction in the markets saw sterling crash alongside the price of government bonds, meaning massive increased costs for government borrowing, and defined benefits pension schemes being hours away from insolvency until rescued by a Bank of England intervention costing 65 billion quid. And all of this was triggered by an uncosted and unforeseen cut in the highest rate income tax band. This top tax rate cut would have given away £2 billion a year to the very wealthiest earners, at a time when the less well-off are choosing between heating and eating, and with people skipping meals in order to be able to afford to feed their kids. As U-turns go, that was one of the most predictable imaginable, and begs the question, how on earth did she think she could get that one through Parliament in the first place? Next, the windfall tax on electricity generators. Another screeching U-turn after Truss finally agreed to cap prices charged by wind farms and nuclear power stations, who will have their revenues capped under a new government plan to ensure they're not benefiting from record high energy prices. No new windfall taxes for oil and gas producers, mind. But do bear in mind that Truss worked for Shell before entering politics, and that her leadership campaign was funded with £100,000 coming from the wife of a former BP executive. She clearly doesn't want to tax her friends and donors. But nevertheless, these are new windfall taxes on some energy generators which she had previously categorically ruled out. Next, her promised employment rights crackdown within 30 days of taking office. Truss said during her leadership campaign that she would introduce a law cracking down on the right to strike within 30 days, forcing minimum service levels on critical national infrastructure, and also forcing workers to cross picket lines to keep services running. But Parliament is yet to see any primary legislation, despite that 30-day point now having been passed. Next, perhaps not her most important U-turn, but as a Francophile, it's one that I was pleased to see. Do you remember during her leadership campaign she said that the jury's out when asked whether French President Macron was a friend or a foe? I shared Macron's shock at this childish and populist comment, and was pleased when he decided to remain adult about it, responding that the UK and France had long enjoyed a close relationship. But after taking office, Dim Lizzie discovered to her surprise that despite her and the Brexitist propaganda demonising the French over the last 6 years, that in the real world, our two countries are working together on a range of security and other issues, forcing her into the small U-turn of describing President Macron categorically as a friend. Next, the energy bills handouts that she's now so proud of and uses as her answer to every question, whether it's about Tory corruption or the UK's state-sponsored people trafficking of refugees to Rwanda. Liz Truss repeatedly attacked handouts during the leadership process, saying at one point, "What I don't support is taking money off people in tax and then giving it back to them in handouts." Yet within days of taking office, she announced an unfocused 2-year energy bills handout for everyone in Britain, rich and poor, which will cost £60 billion in the first 6 months alone, and which will be funded by increased government borrowing, meaning us and our children will end up paying it back with interest at some point in the future. The energy price guarantee, which caps average bills at £2,500 a year, is of course to be welcomed, even if it goes nowhere near far enough, still leaving most of us with fuel bills double what they were this time last year. But the point is, it's yet another complete U-turn on what she said previously. Next, not presenting the government's economic plans. The recent so-called fiscal event was basically a budget, but without costings, without an Office for Budget Responsibility Analysis, and without proper economic forecasts. Though Truss's chancellor promised to deliver them, but only in late November, 2 months after this budget that wasn't a budget. Then, in a U-turn, he said he would publish the forecast shortly, before U-turning again to say he was sticking to the plan to publish in late November, before U-turning yet again, promising the forecasts for October 31st. I think these all qualify as Truss U-turns because the buck stops with her. Next, the most Tory of all these U-turns, when just days into her premiership, it emerged that Liz Truss's Chief of Staff, Mark Fulbrook, was being paid via his own lobbying firm. Although Truss's spokesperson said that it was not unusual for staff on secondment to have such an arrangement, a U-turn soon followed, as the arrangement came in for criticism from even the right-wing media, and with Downing Street soon forced to announce that, while there are established arrangements for employees to join government on secondment, to avoid speculation, Mark Fulbrook will be employed directly by the government on a special advisor contract. Next, pay cuts for public sector workers outside London. Remember that one? A policy announcement reducing the pay of nurses, teachers and other public sector workers in areas with lower average wages as part of what she referred to as a war on waste. Her press release claimed the idea would eventually save £8.8 billion if it were adopted for all public sector workers. But very soon after, a furious backlash saw her abandoning her flagship policy only hours after it had been announced, and accused the media of misrepresenting it, although she couldn't explain exactly how it had been misrepresented. But that's what she does. Like Donald Trump, never say sorry, never take the blame. It's always someone else's fault. So, as I record this video, there are a number of future U-turns that seem to be hurtling towards us, in which may have already happened by the time you're watching this video. Here are some of my predictions. First, a U-turn on real terms benefits cuts. Boris Johnson had promised to raise benefits by inflation, around 10%, next April. But Liz Truss had flown a kite to get reaction to U-turning on his pledge and only raising them by the average earnings increase of 5.5%. That would be a real terms cut. But now it's looking likely that she could U-turn on the U-turn after a furious revolt amongst Tory backbenchers, and indeed some cabinet ministers too. Earlier this week, Downing Street said the Prime Minister is open-minded and listening to concerns, stressing no decision has been made. Next, no public spending cuts. In the leadership campaign, Truss was very clear on this. And during Prime Minister's questions this week, she doubled down by still insisting that this was indeed her plan. No spending cuts. But with all the tax cuts and no spending cuts, economists are warning that Truss is opening up another black hole in the nation's finances, amounting to £60 billion annually for the next few years. Something has to give, and I predict it's going to see another U-turn from the Trussatron and a cut in public spending. Next, trophy hunting and the pledge to ban imports in the Tory manifesto. In what's looking very much like another U-turn, ministers have refused to confirm they'll press ahead with a ban, despite repeated promises to do so. Next, the commitment to the smoke-free by 2030 target. Watching Therese Coffey's car crash interview with Kay Burley on Sky this week, when questioned, the cigar-smoking health secretary said she is not aware whether the target to get the adult smoking rate down to 5% or under has been axed. The government had committed several times to publishing a tobacco control plan by later this year, but officials with knowledge of Miss Coffey's intentions say she, along with the Truss government, do not plan to honour that promise. And with their friends in Tufton Street, including the IEA and their network of right-wing libertarian ultras, being rumoured to take vast donations from the tobacco industry, well, this is hardly surprising. And finally, another U-turn on a U-turn, this time regarding rent reforms and no-fault evictions. In June, the Tories said that landlords would not be able to evict tenants in England without giving a valid reason. But this week, reports emerged that this plan is set to be shelved by Truss. After outcry from various sources, Liz Truss said at PMQs she would go ahead with the ban on no-fault evictions after all. Another U-turn that came as a complete surprise to absolutely no one at this stage.